Hi, my wonderful friends. It's Awakened Angel here with my spiritual awakening video. The past whole year after my awakening, I was really just integrating and adjusting and completing the awakening. You know what I mean? So I decided to make this video because so many people are messaging me every single day asking me about my spiritual practices, about my spiritual beliefs, about what happened with the awakening and everything. So it seems quite appropriate to make a video on it. The timing feels good and right. So I was severely depressed for a decade. Basically an entire freaking decade, you guys. It was a long depression, and there was times when I would come out of it a bit, but then just fall back into it for months on end. So it was a huge struggle for me, being depressed, and the depression culminated in a near suicide attempt. I almost hung myself, and I had a near-death vision of myself hanging there, of the job being completed, of what I was about to do. I had a vision of it, and not only was it a vision, but my dead body stayed hanging there for over 8 hours. And I was just sitting in this room with my own dead body. It was heavy, man. But what I can tell you is that it did stop me from committing suicide, and that's probably why it happened, you know? Some people think that I saw my own death in another dimension and all these other things. I'm really not sure, and I don't contemplate these things too much. I just don't. The good thing is that it stopped me from doing it, you know? So, I started meditating. Honestly, I was severely depressed for another year after the suicide attempt, and just not doing anything, not leaving the house or anything like that. So, I knew that nothing was ever going to change, that I was never going to come out of this depressive, apathetic state unless I did something. And I had been in a 12-step program for 10 years before because I was a drug addict as a child. So I knew that a spiritual life and spiritual practices really was going to be the answer for me. I knew it was the only way in my heart, was to go back towards the divine, go back towards God and that type of lifestyle. And I did, finally. I started meditating. My main practice for a year was meditation. A lot of you have so many questions about meditation. And just to let you know, I've never done any certain types of meditation. I always just dove into it, and it came pretty naturally to me. I could always touch the silence, and I'm pretty sure this is because of my past life work, spiritual work that I've done. I've lived many monastic lifetimes in India as monks, sadhus, and a saint in my past life. So this life and the awakening really was a culmination of all the past lives and the work that I had done. But of course, I still had to do spiritual work in this one. I was very traumatized. I had been through a lot of dark things, obviously being a drug addict at a young age. And then I was a stripper, and I was drinking so much alcohol at work for 5 years before I started doing spiritual practice. And I want to make a side note here that I actually did not stop drinking when I started doing spiritual practices. I didn't change things like that. And a lot of people, they wait and they say, I'm going to quit drinking before I start doing spiritual practice, or I'm going to quit that. That's just not the way, okay? Just dive in, because to postpone spiritual practice and healing is never a good idea. Now is always the time to start that practice and to start healing and recovering from whatever it is you're recovering from in life. So my meditations were very physically dynamic from the very beginning. I would scream, cry, throw tantrums. I mean, if anyone had witnessed what was going on, they would have thought that I needed a fucking exorcism. They would have really thought that. And I like to call this practice, which I've done with meditation and with other spiritual practices, chanting and worshiping, I like to call it organic spiritual practice, where you just sit down and you let what happens happen. I mean, what a novel idea, right? So many people just approach spiritual practice as homework, and it's like by the book. I know that Hinduism can be very by the book. The scriptures say, do this, do this, do this, do that, depending on which spiritual path that you're following. There's nothing wrong with people following yogic paths, because these paths have been laid out for a reason, and they do lead to liberation. But I was unable to actually follow any of these paths, because being in America, being in Los Angeles, I had no one to teach me about Hinduism or about proper practices, okay? So I was meditating for 1 year, and it had gotten to the point where I was meditating for about 3 hours a day. And by this time, I was actually sitting still in practice for long hours and going very deep into silence. Sometimes my roommates would walk in and they would talk to me, and I would just have no idea that they were talking to me. So I was really in the zone, really immersed in meditation and a trance state. And this whole time I was into the New Age community. Thank God that I was doing the meditation practices, because if I hadn't been doing that, honestly, the New Age stuff, it did nothing for me spiritually, and it left me with more questions than answers. And so anyway, that's what I have to say about the spiritual community, the New Age spiritual community for now. So it was pretty miraculous that when I started really exploring what are chakras, what is this, what are all these concepts that I'm hearing in the New Age community that they don't provide a source. They don't tell you where these practices come from in these New Age articles. So I started realizing that really the core, the place that these practices came from was Hinduism. And I actually literally went from worshiping Jesus to worshiping Mahakali and Shiva and other tantric goddesses. This may sound kind of strange to some people that I just flipped from one religion to another, but I recently made a post talking about how I've always been very spiritually open, and I've never let a religion brainwash me. It's more about the connection to spirit, the spiritual growth, and that divine connection. The divine really is one omnipresent source. It doesn't really have a name. It doesn't really have a face. Okay, so archetypes are just that. Archetypes are there so that the spiritual aspirant has a personality or a face that they can fall in love with and connect with. And yeah. So I found Hinduism 1 year into my spiritual practice. Within weeks, my spiritual guru came into my life, and it was quite miraculous. I was introduced to her by my first Hindu friend that I made online. I was starting to make posts about Hinduism, And my friend, I started making a friend. His name is Sue. And he started telling me about this woman who was amazing. He called her Mata Ji. And he said that his life totally changed after he met her, and that I really should meet her and all this stuff. I was pretty not apprehensive, but I was just skeptical. I was happy to meet this woman, but I had no expectations upon her. I didn't really expect anything to happen. I was just gonna meet her, And when I met her, it was the most miraculous, beautiful thing ever. I cried. I told her I loved her. She told me I am your mother. And I have like a lot of mother issues because I never knew my birth mother. So it was really this beautiful, beautiful reconnecting of souls. They do say that you may have the same spiritual teacher for many lifetimes, and that's how it felt. It just felt like, yes, I have found you again, Mama. I call her Mama. And it was just so beautiful. Within a couple months, I experienced an energy transmission from her, a very intense one, which was the turning point of my spiritual evolution. Basically, I experienced being without being Drew. My real name is Drew, so I remember just being in my guru's presence, and I was just literally falling into a trance, into meditation, and I could not control it. I remember I wanted to look at my wonderful Mataji's face so badly, but my body was collapsing. I was going into a ball of mush, and the only thought that kept coming was, I have to let myself go. And I did let myself go. And I fell into that nothingness. And it was so beautiful. Eventually, she left the video call, or the video call ended. She was actually, before it ended, she was chanting Om to me, which was so beautiful. But eventually the call ended, but I didn't notice because I was just in a mushy pile of divine goo. Eventually I realized she was no longer on the call, and I rolled onto the floor, pulled a blanket on top of my head, and I wrapped it around myself because the Shakti flowing through my body had made me just so cold. I was shivering, and I just remained in that state for God knows how long. And at this time, I had been worshiping and chanting the mantras of my favorite gods and goddesses, which I mentioned are Shiva, Kali, and then a few other tantric goddesses that I was drawn to. I don't know, maybe it's just my spiritual history. Maybe I was a tantrika in my, my past lives. So, but there was just this real draw to the tantric goddesses, and I just wasn't drawn to the fluffy, pretty gods, I just wasn't. I've always kind of been drawn to like the darker side of things, and like alternative cultures and things like that. So maybe that's why, and I think that helped. It was a big indicator in my spiritual journey that I was open to transcending any ideas of duality or good and bad, So, I keep saying so. Hopefully you guys find it cute, but I don't really like to write down what I'm going to do in videos. I like to keep it very natural and just put it out there. I don't like to rehearse or anything. So, where was I? The energy transmission, okay. After the energy transmission, there surely was a boost in my Kundalini energy and Kundalini awakening. I remember if I even looked at a Shiva lingam, or if I even looked at a picture of a temple or anything holy, my body would, I would jolt. So much spiritual energy, had been transmitted to me from my guru. She's the most powerful, loving woman, and she's a normal lady. She's a householder with a family, and she's a devotee of Tara, which I believe is also a tantric goddess. So, anyhow, after that, I was chanting mostly Kali's mantras for up to 6 hours a day. Pretty much all day, all I was doing was chanting her mantras, having these kundalini physical kriyas that were uncontrollable, and I just couldn't stop. It was, I'm going to make this real simple for you guys. I got a taste of the truth in that energy transmission in front of my guru, and it was like I was just on a roller coaster ride to arrive at that truth fully and permanently. That's all it was. Like, it's very simple. Like I said, I wasn't chanting. I had no guidance on mantras. Of course, I've heard that, you should have a guru and you should have guidance from the guru taking you through every step of Kundalini awakening and spiritual awakening. But my Mataji doesn't speak one word of English, and I don't speak one word of Hindi. So I wasn't going to wait around. So I just worshipped how I felt fit. I found mantras on YouTube and I freaking went for it. And everything about this being got purified. And I think it was maybe 3 or 4 months that I was really chanting all day, every day. Excuse me. I think I'm having allergies. I hope I'm not getting sick. So basically, I became purified through the chanting and worshiping and surrendering to the goddess, surrendering to the serpent, to Kundalini, letting it take over my body, rewire me in every way, and letting it sweep away my ego and sweep away my individual identity. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. I know a lot of people don't really understand ego death that much if they haven't been through it, but basically, the obsession and the belief in this identity that you have in this life, it has to go. So that identity literally has to die. The spiritual aspirant has to come to a point where they see that that is not real. And what is real is the silence beyond all of this, the nothingness, the primordial void. That's what's real. This is a dream of consciousness. And consciousness dreams this dream for stimulation, for experience, for expansion, to amuse itself. Basically. I think I've touched on everything that I wanted to. I really didn't want to complicate the story because there's nothing complicated about spiritual growth or spiritual awakening. You can use peeling an onion, peeling one layer of the onion, one layer, until it's all gone. Or I like to use the metaphor of emptying a glass. You can imagine the ego's the water in the glass. And it's just an emptying. Once the glass becomes empty, the person is fully awakened. It's funny because a lot of people focus so much on unity and oneness, but really awakening goes so far beyond that. Like I just said, you are not this whatsoever. It's a dream. And that's what needs to be realized. Eventually I did experience oneness. I looked around and saw that everything, every person, every creature, every inanimate object was the self, and that it was perfect. Absolutely perfect, and absolutely what I want. Because I'm the creator. I'm the dreamer. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. And so much love and blessings to you. Please leave any questions and comments you may have after watching this video. Until next time.